Story 1, Outline 1, The Long Desert Stretch. The last vestiges of sunset bled across the vast, desolate expanse of the Nevada desert, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and angry orange. Sarah, a 24-year-old nursing student, gripped the steering wheel of her beat-up Toyota Camry, her knuckles white. She was on a cross-country drive to visit her ailing grandmother, a journey that had stretched into a grueling 17-hour marathon. The highway, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through an ocean of scrub brush and rock, was eerily empty. No other headlights pierced the rapidly deepening twilight, and the radio, after hours of static, had finally given up entirely. A profound, unnatural silence pressed in on her from all sides, amplifying the rhythmic hum of her tires and the nervous thumping of her own heart. She checked her fuel gauge again. It was dangerously low, a red warning light glaring like a baleful eye. The last gas station had been over an hour ago, a forgotten oasis of flickering neon and stale coffee. Ahead, the road stretched into an impenetrable black void, punctuated only by the occasional reflective marker that seemed to glow with a malevolent inner light. A shiver, not entirely from the desert's rapidly cooling air, traced its way down her spine. This isolation, usually a welcome reprieve from the constant demands of city life, now felt predatory, suffocating. She instinctively pressed harder on the accelerator, a futile gesture against the encroaching darkness and the unsettling sense of vulnerability that had begun to crawl up her back. Her eyes darted to the rearview mirror, checking for any sign of other vehicles, but there was nothing. Just the endless, consuming blackness that seemed to follow her, a silent, patient hunter. The solitude, once a comfort, had morphed into a terrifying weight. She chewed on her lip, a nervous habit, and forced herself to focus on the road ahead, trying to push away the creeping dread that whispered promises of unknown horrors, lurking just beyond the reach of her headlights. The thought of running out of gas here, in the middle of nowhere, was a cold, tangible fear. Outline 2. A fateful pickup. Just as Sarah's anxiety threatened to overwhelm her, a flicker of movement by the side of the road caught her eye. She instinctively slowed down, her foot hovering over the brake. Standing impossibly still in the gloom, a silhouette against the pale glow of her headlights, was a man. He was tall, dressed in dark, nondescript clothing, a backpack slung over one shoulder. His thumb was slightly raised, a classic hitchhiker's gesture, but there was something unnervingly static about his posture, almost as if he'd been waiting there for a very long time. Her first instinct screamed at her to keep driving, to speed past this unsettling anomaly in the desolate landscape. Every horror story she'd ever heard, every cautionary tale from her parents echoed in her mind. But then a pang of guilt, a flicker of humanity tugged at her. He looked stranded, vulnerable, alone in the vast, unforgiving desert. What if he was in genuine trouble? What if he was hurt? The desert nights were brutally cold. Against her better judgment, she tapped the brakes, pulling over a few feet ahead of him. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of apprehension. She watched him approach in her rearview mirror. He walked with a peculiar, almost gliding gait, covering the distance to her car with unnatural speed. As he reached the passenger door, his face was still obscured by the shadows, but she felt the weight of his gaze, an unnerving intensity that seemed to penetrate the thin metal of her car. He tapped lightly on the window. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the lock. Then, with a deep, shaky breath, she pressed the button, and the passenger door clicked open with an ominous thud. He slid into the seat, his movements fluid and silent. The air in the car instantly grew colder, heavy with the faint, unsettling scent of damp earth and something acrid, like burnt sugar. "Thank you," he said, his voice a low, raspy whisper, dry and brittle like crumbling leaves. "You're a kind soul, Sarah." The sound of her name, uttered by a complete stranger in the middle of nowhere, sent a fresh wave of ice through her veins, freezing her smile. Outline 3, the shifting mask, the sound of her name, casually delivered by the stranger, ripped through Sarah's forced composure. Her mind raced, trying to recall if she had mentioned her name, if her license plate was visible. But no, she hadn't. She tried to steady her voice, forcing a casual tone. How did you know my name?" she asked, her eyes darting nervously between the road and the passenger beside her. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that scraped against her nerves. "So a kind soul like you out here alone in the dark, You radiate a certain essence, he replied, his voice still that unsettling whisper. It's quite discernible. His face, now caught in the dim glow of the dashboard, was gaunt, almost skeletal, with eyes that seemed too dark, too deep, like empty pits reflecting nothing. He wore an old dark fedora pulled low, partially obscuring his features. Sarah's blood ran cold. This wasn't a normal hitchhiker. There was something profoundly wrong, something predatory about him. She accelerated, her foot pressing harder on the gas, desperate to reach the next town, the next sign of civilization. Where are you headed?" she managed, trying to keep her voice from trembling. He turned his head slowly, the brim of his fedora casting deep shadows over his face. "Oh, anywhere the road takes me," he murmured, his gaze fixed on her, an unnerving, palpable intensity. "I often travel with interesting companions." His left hand, long and disturbingly pale, rested casually on his knee, and Sarah caught a glimpse of something glinting from his fingernails. Not dirt, but something dark, almost like dried blood beneath the cuticle. A cold knot formed in her stomach. She felt a prickle on her neck, as if unseen eyes were watching her from the back seat, even though she knew she was alone. The car seemed to hum with a strange, unnatural vibration, and the air grew colder still, the acrid scent intensifying. "I travel? Light?" he continued, his voice a barely audible hiss. "But my collection, it grows quite heavy." He then reached into his backpack, a slow, deliberate movement that made Sarah's heart leap into her throat. He pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket. "Perhaps you've seen this before," he whispered, holding it out towards her. Inside was a miniature portrait of a young woman, her eyes wide with a terror that mirrored Sarah's own. Outline 4. The unseen companion. The locket, clutched in the hitchhiker's pale hand, felt like a burning coal radiating an unspoken horror. The woman in the photo's terrified eyes seemed to bore into Sarah's soul, a chilling premonition of her own fate. Sarah's mind screamed for her to react, to fight, but she was paralyzed by a terror so profound it rooted her to the spot. Her gaze darted to the dashboard, the speedometer now creeping dangerously high. Who is she?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely a breath, her eyes flicking nervously towards the hitchhiker, whose face remained an unreadable mask of shadows. He gave a soft, chilling chuckle. "Just a kind soul like you. She found me on a long road too." He then slowly, deliberately reached his long fingers towards her neck. Sarah instinctively recoiled, letting out a strangled cry. She swerved the car violently, jerking the wheel, a desperate, instinctual attempt to dislodge him, to escape. The Camry screeched, tires losing traction, swerving wildly across the desolate highway. The hitchhiker, however, remained unnervingly still, his body seemingly unaffected by the violent movements of the car. His pale fingers still reached slowly, inexorably towards her. With a burst of adrenaline, Sarah slammed on the brakes, simultaneously twisting the steering wheel, sending the car into a violent, uncontrolled spin. Metal shrieked, glass shattered, and the world became a blur of dust and darkness. The car slammed into something unseen off the side of the road, the impact throwing Sarah violently forward against her seatbelt, her head hitting the steering wheel with a sickening thud. Darkness consumed her. When she came to, moments or minutes later, the air was filled with the acrid smell of burning oil and dust. Her head throbbed, a dull, agonizing pain. She looked to the passenger seat. It was empty. The door was open, swinging slightly on its mangled hinges. He was gone. The locket, however, lay on her lap, cold and heavy, reflecting the pale moonlight. She gripped it, her fingers trembling, and managed to stumble out of the wrecked car, her body aching, her mind reeling. She was alone again, the silence of the desert more terrifying than any scream. She ran, stumbling through the darkness until she collapsed hours later, found by a passing motorist just before dawn. Sarah survived the crash, but the encounter left an indelible mark. She never saw the hitchhiker again, but the locket remained a chilling souvenir. Years later, she would occasionally catch the faintest scent of damp earth and burnt sugar, and sometimes when driving alone on long stretches of road, she would feel a subtle, unexplainable chill, a presence in the passenger seat, an unseen companion, always there, patiently waiting. Because some rides once given are never truly over. Story 2, Outline 1. The cabin in the secluded pines, the weathered sign, half obscured by overgrown pine boughs, read, Whispering Woods Retreat, secluded getaway. Liam and Chloe, a young couple desperate for an escape from the relentless grind of city life, had rented the remote cabin for a week, hoping to rekindle their connection amidst nature's tranquility. The cabin itself was charmingly rustic, nestled deep within an ancient pine forest in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, miles from the nearest paved road. Its wooden walls, imbued with the scent of pine and damp earth, seemed to hum with a quiet, peaceful energy. The only sounds were the rustle of leaves and the occasional call of a distant bird. On their first evening, as the last slivers of daylight painted the sky in soft mauves and oranges, Chloe leaned against Liam on the porch swing, sipping a glass of wine. "This is exactly what we needed," she sighed, her gaze drifting over the dense, towering trees that encircled them, a living, breathing wall of green. Liam squeezed her hand, a genuine smile on his face. No emails, no deadlines, just us. Yet as darkness descended, an unsettling feeling began to prickle at Chloe's skin. The forest, once a comforting embrace, now felt like a watchful, silent presence. The shadows seemed to lengthen, to deepen, taking on grotesque, indistinct shapes between the trees. She felt a vague sense of unease, a feeling of being observed that she couldn't shake. She dismissed it as city-dweller paranoia, a reaction to the unfamiliar solitude. Inside, the cabin felt cozy, warm, but the large uncurtained windows facing the dense woods seemed to act as dark, reflective mirrors, hinting at something beyond the glass. That night, as they lay in bed, Chloe swore she heard a faint, rhythmic crunching sound from outside, like footsteps on dry leaves, moving slowly around the cabin. It stopped directly beneath their window, followed by an unnerving silence. "Liam," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Did you hear that?" He stirred, half asleep. "Just the wind, honey." But Chloe knew it wasn't the wind. It was too deliberate, too heavy. And the silence that followed felt like a holding of breath. Outline 2, Unseen Eyes. The next morning, Chloe found a small, intricately carved wooden bird, unlike anything native to the Appalachian region, placed carefully on their porch step. Its eyes, tiny black beads, seemed to stare directly into the cabin. A chill, colder than the morning air, traced its way down her spine. "That's odd," she remarked, showing it to Liam. He shrugged it off. "Probably fell out of someone's car passing through. Kids play with these things, but no cars pass this road." The feeling of being watched intensified over the next few days. Chloe started noticing small, subtle changes around the cabin. A window latch, which she was certain she'd secured, would be slightly ajar. A garden gnome, placed neatly by the front door, would be facing the wrong way, its painted eyes directed towards the deepest part of the woods. Liam, initially dismissive, began to share her growing unease. One afternoon, while hiking a rarely used trail behind the cabin, Liam stumbled upon a small hidden clearing. In the center, almost perfectly concealed by dense undergrowth, stood a crude makeshift tripod. Mounted on it, almost perfectly aimed at their cabin, was a high-powered trail camera, the kind used by hunters to track wildlife. His blood ran cold. This wasn't a hiker's oversight. This was deliberate. He carefully retrieved the SD card, his heart hammering against his ribs. Back at the cabin, his hands trembling, Liam inserted the card into his laptop. The images flashed across the screen, hundreds of them. Not of deer or bears, but of them. Of Chloe reading on the porch. Of him chopping firewood. Of them sharing a quiet dinner. And then there were the pictures taken late at night. Images of a figure, tall and gaunt, standing perfectly still at the edge of the tree line watching their cabin. Its face was always obscured by shadow or distance, but the figure's posture, the unnerving stillness, was profoundly chilling. A final image appeared, taken just last night. It showed the figure standing directly beneath their bedroom window, its head tilted slightly as if listening. And in its hand, clear as day, was the small, intricately carved wooden bird. Just then, a low, guttural growl vibrated from the woods directly behind the cabin, closer than anything they had heard before, a sound that was less animal and more something else. Outline 3, The Invasion. The growl, deep and chilling, reverberated through the cabin, shaking the very floorboards. Liam snatched the laptop shut, his face pale with raw fear. "He's here," he whispered, his eyes darting frantically towards the windows. Chloe, Her breath catching in her throat clutched his arm, her body trembling uncontrollably. The photographs, the countless images of their lives meticulously documented, had stripped away all sense of security, replaced by a suffocating dread. This wasn't a casual stalker. This was an obsessed, methodical predator. They frantically checked all the doors and windows, double-locking everything, but the sense of being watched, of being completely vulnerable, was overwhelming. The air grew impossibly cold, and a faint, acrid scent like damp earth and something sweet and sickly began to permeate the cabin. Suddenly a loud thump came from upstairs, followed by the distinct sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the floorboards directly above their heads. The cabin was a single-story structure. There was no upstairs. A scream tore from Chloe's throat, bouncing off the wooden walls. "He's inside!" Liam grabbed her hand, pulling her towards the back door, their only viable escape route. Just as they reached it, a crash erupted from the living room. The sound of glass shattering, followed by a low, guttural chuckle that echoed through the small space, closer, more present. "You're not going anywhere, Liam," a voice whispered, dry and brittle like crumbling leaves directly from the living room. "The game isn't over yet." The back door, which Liam was about to unbolt, suddenly creaked open by itself, revealing not the escape they desperately sought, but a wall of impenetrable darkness. A tall, gaunt figure stood in the doorway, framed by the moonless night. Its face was obscured by the shadows cast by a wide-brimmed hat, but its eyes, glowing with a faint, malevolent red, seemed to bore into their very souls. In its outstretched hand, it held a small, intricately carved wooden bird, and then it slowly, deliberately began to raise its other hand, revealing something long and glinting in the pale moonlight, something sharpened to a lethal point. Outline 4. The game continues, the glint of sharpened steel reflected in the figure's burning red eyes, a silent, terrifying promise of violence. Liam instinctively shoved Chloe behind him, his heart hammering against his ribs, every primal instinct screaming at him to protect her. The stalker, a silent, looming sentinel of pure menace, took a slow, deliberate step forward, the dry whisper of its voice echoing through the small cabin. "Such beautiful fear," it rasped, its gaze fixed on Chloe, a rare vintage. Chloe, paralyzed with terror, could only manage a choked whimper. The air was thick with the acrid, sickly sweet scent, and the cabin groaned around them, as if the very structure was alive with dread. Liam, fueled by a desperate surge of adrenaline, lunged forward, not at the stalker, but towards a heavy, ornate wooden chest by the fireplace. He seized a heavy iron poker, brandishing it like a sword. With a furious roar, he swung it at the figure. The poker connected with a sickening thud, not against flesh, but against something unnervingly solid, like thick wood. The figure reeled back slightly, but showed no sign of pain, only a peculiar, almost amused tilt of its head. "A spirited defense," it hissed, its red eyes burning brighter, but futile. As the figure recovered, Liam saw his chance. He grabbed Chloe, pulling her frantically towards the broken living room window, the source of the earlier crash. They scrambled through the jagged opening, tearing their clothes, their skin scraping against the glass, ignoring the searing pain. They burst out into the cool night air, running blindly, stumbling through the dense woods, the eerie silence of the forest, now punctuated by their ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of their feet. They didn't look back. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs gave out, not stopping until they reached the nearest small town. Hours later, bursting into a brightly lit gas station, disheveled and covered in cuts and bruises, they told their story to the skeptical local sheriff, who found the cabin empty and undisturbed, no broken window, no sign of forced entry, only the lingering scent of pine and something subtly sweet. Liam and Chloe never returned to Whispering Woods. They rebuilt their lives, but the trauma of that night left an indelible scar. Months later, as they settled into a new apartment in a different city, Chloe found a small, intricately carved wooden bird, its black bead eyes staring blankly, placed carefully on their new windowsill. And sometimes late at night, in the profound silence of their apartment, a faint rhythmic crunching sound, like footsteps on dry leaves, seemed to circle their building slowly, deliberately. The game never truly over, only paused, the unseen eyes still watching, waiting for their next move. Story 3. Outline 1. A quiet night at home. The city hummed with its usual nocturnal rhythm. a distant muffled symphony of traffic and sirens, but inside Sarah's small, meticulously organized apartment, a profound quiet reigned. Sarah, a graphic designer in her late 20s, cherished these solitary evenings. Tonight she was curled on her couch, a mug of herbal tea steaming beside her, lost in the pages of a fantasy novel. Rain pattered softly against her living room window, a comforting sound against the silence. It was just past midnight. She glanced at the clock on her phone, 12:17 a.m. Too late for casual calls, too early for anything urgent. A sense of peace hard-won after a stressful week settled over her. Her cat Merlin, a sleek black creature with emerald eyes, purred contentedly on the back of the couch, a soft rumbling counterpoint to the rain. Suddenly her landline phone, a relic she kept mostly for emergencies, shattered the stillness with its shrill ring. Sarah flinched, startled. No one used that line anymore, not really. Her heart gave a little jump, an irrational flicker of unease. Who would be calling this late? Her mind immediately went to worst-case scenarios. An accident, a family emergency. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the receiver, a strange prickle of intuition telling her not to answer. But the persistent ringing wore her down. With a sigh, she picked it up, her voice a little more breathless than she intended. "Hello?" she said, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. There was only silence on the other end, a hollow, dead silence that stretched for an unnerving moment. Then a soft click and the line went dead. Sarah frowned, a knot of confusion and a fresh wave of unease tightening in her stomach. A wrong number, she told herself, trying to dismiss the lingering chill. But Merlin, usually unbothered by anything, had stopped purring. His emerald eyes were wide, fixed on the closed front door of the apartment, his tail twitching slowly. Outline 2. The voice on the line, Sarah replaced the receiver, a nervous tremor in her hand. Merlin's uncharacteristic behavior, his intense stare at the front door, only heightened her unease. She tried to tell herself it was just a strange occurrence, an anonymous prank call, but the quiet stillness of her apartment now felt heavier, charged with an unseen tension. Just as she was about to dismiss it, the landline rang again. This time the sound was sharper, more insistent, jarring her nerves. She stared at the phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. Who was this? And why were they calling her private landline at this hour? A wave of cold dread washed over her, a premonition of something deeply unsettling. After several rings, she took a shaky breath and answered, her voice barely a whisper. "Hello?" Again, silence. A prolonged, agonizing silence that seemed to stretch into eternity. Then a low, guttural voice, distorted as if speaking through a cloth, finally spoke. "Still awake, Sarah?" The voice was calm, unnervingly soft, yet it radiated an icy menace that instantly froze Sarah's blood. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, delivered with a chilling certainty. Her breath hitched in her throat. Her name again, spoken by a stranger, this time with a clear, sinister intent. Who is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling uncontrollably. A soft, dry chuckle echoed from the other end of the line, a sound devoid of humor, utterly devoid of humanity. "Someone who knows you very well, Sarah. Someone who's been watching you." The caller paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the air, a suffocating weight. "Someone who's very close." Merlin suddenly hissed, his fur bristling, his eyes still fixed on the front door, his ears flattened against his head. A new, terrifying thought slammed into Sarah with the force of a physical blow. They weren't calling from outside. They were calling from inside her building. Or worse. "I can see you, Sarah," the voice continued, now closer, almost a breathy whisper directly into her ear, despite the phone. "That pretty purple teacup on your coffee table. The way your cat's tail twitches when he's nervous." Sarah's eyes darted to the teacup, then to Merlin, who was now trembling. Every detail was accurate. Her mind raced, a frantic search for an escape, for an explanation. "I'm calling the police," she choked out, her voice cracking. Another dry chuckle. "Too late, Sarah, much, much too late. I'm already here." And then a distinct metallic click sounded from her front door. The deadbolt, which she knew she had locked, had just been disengaged. Outline 3. The cat and mouse. The metallic click of the deadbolt sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated terror through Sarah. The phone slipped from her numb fingers, clattering to the floor. The line went dead. She was no longer just threatened. She was invaded. He was in, somewhere inside her apartment. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of primal fear. Merlin, with a low growl, arched his back, then vanished beneath the couch, a streak of black shadow. Sarah, driven by a raw surge of adrenaline, scrambled away from the living room, her mind racing, searching for a place to hide. The small apartment, usually a sanctuary, now felt like a death trap. She darted into her bedroom, slamming the door shut, fumbling desperately with the small, flimsy lock. It felt woefully inadequate. She pressed her back against the door, straining to hear over the frantic pounding of her own blood in her ears. A floorboard creaked in the living room. Then another. Slow, deliberate footsteps, heavy and methodical, moving across her apartment. He was here. He was truly here. The air in her bedroom grew impossibly cold, despite the warmth of her duvet. She crawled beneath her bed, pushing herself as far back as she could, her body shaking uncontrollably. Dust bunnies and forgotten objects pricked at her skin, but she barely registered them. Her breath hitched in her throat, every inhale a desperate struggle to remain silent. She could hear the footsteps now closer, outside her bedroom door. They stopped. A long, agonizing moment of silence stretched, broken only by the frantic thumping of her heart. Then the doorknob slowly, deliberately began to turn. The flimsy lock held for a moment, groaning under the pressure. The door creaked open, revealing a sliver of darkness, then a wider gap. So a beam of light from a powerful flashlight cut through the gloom, sweeping across her room. It lingered on her bed, casting long, dancing shadows. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, trying to make herself invisible. Her body rigid with terror. She heard a soft sniff. "Such a good hiding place, Sarah," the distorted voice whispered, directly from above her. "But I always find my toys." A heavy, metallic clatter sounded from the bedside table, followed by a faint, sickly sweet scent, like burnt sugar, filling the air beneath her bed. She knew with a horrifying certainty that he had placed something there. And then the flashlight beam flickered once, twice, and died, plunging the room into absolute, suffocating darkness. Outline 4. The silent escape. The sudden, suffocating darkness amplified Sarah's terror, trapping her in a sensory deprivation chamber of her own making. The intruder was still there above her, silent, invisible, but undeniably present. The faint, sickly sweet scent of burnt sugar, now mingled with the metallic tang of something else, filled her nostrils, making her stomach churn. She could feel his presence, a tangible weight of menace pressing down on her from the space between the bed and the floor. A low, dry chuckle echoed from the darkness, almost directly above her. "Did you think I wouldn't find you, Sarah?" "This is my favorite part. The hunt?" Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, trying to control her ragged breathing, the sound of her own heart threatening to betray her. She felt an inexplicable, chilling pressure on her ankle, a light, cold touch that made her whole body seize up. It was an insubstantial touch, yet utterly real, causing her skin to crawl. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to lash out, to scream, to fight, but she remained frozen, a terrified rabbit in a snare. The pressure on her ankle slowly, deliberately began to drag her. Only a few inches at first, but enough to make her realize she was being pulled from under the bed. Panic, raw and unadulterated, surged through her. With a desperate, primal scream that tore from her throat, she kicked out violently, connecting with something solid. A grunt, rough and surprised, broke the intruder's chilling composure. The pressure on her ankle vanished. This was her chance. Scrambling from beneath the bed, not even bothering to open her eyes, Sarah lunged for the bedroom door, tearing it open. She burst out into the living room, not pausing, not looking back. Her front door, previously sealed by the intruder, was now slightly ajar. She didn't hesitate. She flung it open and bolted, sprinting down the hallway, down the stairs, out into the pouring, rain-soaked street, not stopping until she reached a brightly lit convenience store several blocks away. She collapsed inside, gasping for breath, babbling her story to the bewildered night cashier, who immediately called the police. The responding officers found her apartment door unlocked and a single, meticulously folded note on her coffee table, placed precisely where her teacup had been. It read, "Better luck next time, Sarah. The game continues." No sign of forced entry. No fingerprints, nothing. Sarah moved out the very next day, never to return. But the memory of the voice on the phone, The metallic click of her deadbolt and the chilling scent of burnt sugar haunted her. And sometimes, in the dead of night, she swore she could still hear a faint, distant ring coming from a phone that no longer existed, a chilling reminder that some games... Story 4, Outline 1, A Night at the Traveling Carnival. The air vibrated with a cacophony of distorted music, delighted screams, and the rhythmic clatter of carnival rides. Jamie, a vibrant 18-year-old with streaks of blue in her hair, laughed as her best friend Chloe dragged her towards the House of Mirrors at the local traveling carnival. It was a sweltering late August evening, and the fairgrounds set up in a dusty field on the outskirts of town were packed. The garish neon lights of the rides cast grotesque shadows, and the scent of popcorn, fried dough, and something subtly metallic hung heavy in the humid air. "Come on, Jamie! Last one in is a rotten egg," Chloe shouted over the din, already halfway to the funhouse entrance. Jamie, a natural skeptic, usually avoided such frivolous attractions, preferring the thrill of the roller coasters. But tonight, caught up in the infectious energy of the crowd, she let herself be pulled along. The House of Mirrors looked like any other, a sprawling, tented structure adorned with faded, grotesque clowns whose painted smiles seemed to stretch into genuine menace under the flickering lights. As they waited in the short line, Jamie noticed something unsettling. The carnival workers, usually boisterous and jovial, seemed unusually quiet, their smiles stiff, almost forced. One man, tall and gaunt, with unsettlingly deep-set eyes beneath a wide-brimmed hat, stood by the entrance silently watching the crowd. His dark, ill-fitting suit seemed out of place amidst the vibrant chaos. His gaze, even from a distance, felt unnervingly intense, lingering a moment too long on the younger patrons. Jamie shivered despite the heat. "That guy gives me the creeps," she muttered to Chloe, nudging her. Chloe, distracted by the flashing lights and the promise of fun, merely shrugged. "Oh, he's probably just tired." "It's late." As they finally entered the House of Mirrors, the noise of the carnival faded, replaced by an eerie, disorienting silence, broken only by the soft thud of their footsteps and the echo of their own laughter. The air inside was surprisingly cold, carrying a faint, cloying scent of burnt sugar and something subtly metallic like old blood. Jamie felt a sudden, profound sense of unease. This was not just a funhouse. Outline 2. The House of Mirrors deception. Inside the House of Mirrors, the playful disorientation quickly morphed into something sinister. The endless reflections distorted their figures, turning them into grotesque caricatures, stretching and shrinking them until their own identities felt flimsy, transient. Chloe's earlier laughter gave way to nervous giggles, then to a strained silence, as they navigated the labyrinthine passages of glass. The cold within the funhouse intensified, raising goosebumps on Jamie's arms. The sickly sweet metallic scent grew stronger, almost cloying. They became hopelessly lost, each turn leading to another identical corridor of shimmering, deceptive glass. "This isn't fun anymore," Chloe whispered, her voice tight with a growing panic. "I can't find the exit." Jamie felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. The faint, distorted sounds of the carnival outside seemed to mock them, a distant, muffled echo of a world they couldn't reach. The silence within the mirrors was absolute, oppressive. As they turned another corner, a reflection appeared that wasn't theirs. In the corner of a mirror, just for a split second, Jamie saw a tall, gaunt figure, its face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, standing directly behind them. But when she spun around, there was nothing but their own distorted reflections. "Chloe," Jamie whispered, her voice trembling. "Did you see that?" Chloe, pale and wide-eyed, shook her head, her breath hitching. "No, what did you see?" Just then, a low guttural chuckle echoed from somewhere deep within the mirrors, a dry, rasping sound that seemed to come from all directions at once. "Little lost lambs," the voice whispered, indistinct yet chillingly clear. "So easy to find." Jamie grabbed Chloe's arm, her eyes darting frantically. The mirrors seemed to warp further, the reflections now swirling with shadowy forms that moved just beyond recognition. A sudden, jarring thump sounded from a hidden passage to their left. As they looked, a section of the mirrored wall slowly, deliberately slid open, revealing a dark, narrow corridor that led deeper into the backstage area of the carnival. And standing at its entrance, its red eyes glowing faintly in the gloom, was the tall, gaunt man in the dark suit. He merely gestured with one pale, impossibly long finger. A silent, predatory invitation. Outline 3. The backstage horror. The man in the dark suit, with his glowing red eyes and silent, beckoning finger, was a terrifying sentinel at the entrance to the hidden passage. Jamie and Chloe, paralyzed by fear, could only stare, their minds screaming at them to run, but their bodies rooted to the spot. The air around the man shimmered, thick with the cloying scent of burnt sugar and metallic decay. "Come now, girls," the dry, raspy voice whispered, cutting through the carnival's muffled sounds. "Don't be shy. The real show begins backstage." He stepped aside, revealing an even darker, more chilling interior. Beyond the mirrored walls, the backstage area was a chaotic mess of discarded props, tangled wires, and broken machinery, all bathed in the sickly glow of a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. A profound silence, different from the funhouses, reigned here. A heavy, suffocating silence that felt like a scream held captive. On a workbench, amidst rusted tools and frayed ropes, Jamie's eyes landed on something that made her stomach clench, a collection of small, intricately carved wooden birds, identical to the one she'd seen in Chloe's nightmare, and beside them, a pile of tarnished silver lockets. A wave of pure nausea washed over her. This wasn't just a creepy carnival worker. This was something far, far worse. Suddenly, Chloe, fueled by a surge of desperate adrenaline, broke free from Jamie's grasp and bolted towards the mirrored exit, screaming. The man in the dark suit moved with impossible speed, a blur of shadows. He intercepted Chloe before she reached the exit, his long, pale hand seizing her arm. Chloe shrieked, a raw, piercing sound that was abruptly cut short as his other hand clamped over her mouth. He dragged her, struggling and kicking, into the dark passage. Jamie, stunned by the sudden, violent abduction, could only watch, her heart hammering. The man looked back at her, his red eyes burning with a cold, predatory amusement. "Don't worry, Jamie," the dry voice whispered, now emanating directly into her mind. "She's just getting a head start on the grand finale." He then released Chloe, who crumpled to the floor unconscious. As Jamie stood frozen, terrified, the man slowly, deliberately turned back to her. A long, glinting blade, sharpened to a lethal point, emerged from his sleeve. And then, the sliding mirrored wall behind him slammed shut with a heavy thud, plunging Jamie into absolute darkness, trapping her inside the house of mirrors alone, with him. Outline 4. The unseen audience. The thud of the mirrored wall sealing shut was the sound of Jamie's nightmare becoming horrifyingly real. Plunged into suffocating darkness, she was trapped, alone with the monster. The cloying scent of burnt sugar and metallic blood intensified, filling her lungs, making her dizzy. She could hear her own ragged breathing, loud and desperate, echoing in the blackness. The dry, rasping voice whispered from close by, seeming to emanate from the very air around her. "Shall you have such pretty eyes, Jamie? I'm sure they'll make a fine addition to my collection." Jamie scrambled backward, clawing at the mirrored walls, desperate to find an opening, anything to escape. Her fingers brushed against cold, unyielding glass. Panic, absolute and consuming, threatened to overwhelm her. She could feel his presence, a cold, oppressive weight moving closer, circling her in the darkness. "Don't struggle so," the voice cooed almost kindly, but with an underlying current of unspeakable cruelty. "It only makes it harder for both of us." Suddenly, a faint, sickly green light flickered to life. It wasn't a flashlight. It emanated from the man's face, a swirling vortex of emerald energy where his features should have been. His red eyes glowed with terrifying intensity. He was no man. He was an entity, a creature of shadow and hunger disguised in human form. He held up the glinting blade, its sharp edge reflecting the green light, painting grotesque patterns on the mirrored walls. "Every show needs an audience," he whispered, "and every audience needs a star." Jamie screamed, a raw primal sound that ripped from her throat. But it was swallowed by the sudden, deafening roar of the carnival's loudest ride. Directly outside the House of Mirrors, he lunged. Jamie, with a final, desperate burst of adrenaline, threw herself sideways, evading his attack. Her hand connected with something loose on the wall, a lever. She yanked it down. With a grinding protest of ancient machinery, a section of the mirrored wall in front of her slid open, revealing not the exit, but another darker passage that led outside, into the back alleys of the carnival. She didn't hesitate. She burst out, gasping for air, running blindly into the night, not looking back. She ran until she collapsed, found hours later by a bewildered police officer, incoherent and covered in dust and scrapes. Chloe was found in the backstage area, alive but unconscious, the porcelain doll clutched in her hand. The gaunt man in the dark suit was gone. The carnival, its lights still blazing, its rides still spinning, had vanished by morning, leaving only a dusty, empty field. Jamie never fully recovered. She would often wake up screaming, haunted by the green vortex of his face and his chillin. Story 5, Outline 1. The museum's late shift, the grand, echoing halls of the Blackwood Museum of Antiquities were usually a source of quiet awe. But at 2 a.m. under the stark, utilitarian glow of emergency lights, they became a labyrinth of shadows and uneasy silence. David, a 28-year-old night security guard, meticulously made his rounds, his footsteps echoing ominously on the polished marble floors. He preferred the solitude of the night shift, the contemplative quiet, but tonight an unsettling tension permeated the air. A cold front had blown in, bringing with it a strange, almost electric chill that seeped into the ancient stones of the building. The museum, a vast repository of historical artifacts, was empty save for him. His only company was the hushed static of his walkie-talkie and the omnipresent, unblinking eyes of ancient statues and display mannequins, which seemed to watch him with a silent, eerie intensity. He checked the main entrance, ensuring the heavy oak doors were sealed, then moved through the dinosaur exhibit, the skeletal giants looming over him like petrified monsters. Tonight the silence felt different. It was not the peaceful quiet he usually enjoyed. It was a heavy, expectant silence, as if the very air was holding its breath. He swore he could hear faint, almost imperceptible whispers, carried on the drafts that snaked through the old building. He dismissed it as his imagination, a byproduct of too many late nights and too much coffee. His flashlight beam cut through the deeper shadows, illuminating ancient pottery, gleaming swords and dusty scrolls, each artifact a silent witness to centuries of human history. As he passed the exhibit on ancient Roman artifacts, his heart gave a sudden, inexplicable lurch. The air grew significantly colder, and a faint metallic scent like old iron and something faintly sickly sweet wafted from the far end of the hall. He paused, straining his ears. A faint rhythmic clink like metal on stone seemed to echo from the Egyptian wing, a sound that was too deliberate, too consistent, to be merely the building settling. He gripped his flashlight tighter, a prickle of unease crawling up his spine. He was not alone. Outline 2. The missing artifact. The rhythmic clink from the Egyptian wing was undeniable, a chilling confirmation that David was not alone in the vast, silent museum. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of apprehension. Every instinct screamed at him to call for backup, to retreat, but a morbid curiosity coupled with his sense of duty compelled him forward. He moved slowly, cautiously, his flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive gloom, each step echoing loudly in the sudden, profound silence that followed the cessation of the metallic sound. The sickly, sweet metallic scent grew stronger, almost cloying. As he rounded the corner into the Egyptian exhibit, his flashlight beam swept across the glass display cases, illuminating ancient sarcophagi and intricate burial artifacts. Then his light landed on a specific display, a meticulously preserved ceremonial dagger, rumored to be cursed, dating back to the 18th dynasty. The glass of its display case was shattered, not broken inwards from an external force, but cleanly, precisely, as if cut with surgical precision. And the dagger itself was gone. David stared at the empty display, a cold knot forming in his stomach. This wasn't a random break-in. This was an art thief, highly skilled, operating in the dead of night. His hand instinctively went to his walkie-talkie, but before he could press the call button, a low, dry chuckle echoed from the shadows behind a towering sarcophagus. "Looking for something, David?" The voice was calm, unnervingly soft, yet it radiated an icy menace that instantly froze David's blood. It was the same voice he faintly remembered from an anonymous hang-up call he'd received on the museum line just last week, a voice he had dismissed as a prank. His name, spoken by an unseen intruder, jolted him. He spun around, his flashlight beam dancing wildly, trying to pinpoint the source of the voice. He caught a fleeting glimpse of movement. A tall, gaunt figure dressed in dark clothing, its face obscured by the deep shadows cast by an old, wide-brimmed hat. In its hand, glinting ominously, was the ceremonial dagger. "Such beautiful craftsmanship," the voice continued, now closer, almost a whisper directly into David's ear. "A magnificent piece for my collection." A sudden, sharp whistle pierced the air, not human, but a shrill, metallic sound that seemed to come from the very walls, sending a fresh wave of ice through David's veins. And then, all the emergency lights in the Egyptian wing suddenly died, plunging the entire section into absolute, suffocating darkness, leaving only the faint, sickly green glow from the stolen dagger, held by the unseen figure, to cut through the terrifying black outline. 3. The Predator's Game. The green glow of the ceremonial dagger pulsed ominously in the suffocating darkness, a beacon of malevolence. David stood frozen, his flashlight beam now useless against the overwhelming black. The intruder, now revealed to be the enigmatic figure in the wide-brimmed hat, was a silent, predatory presence, its form vaguely outlined by the eerie glow of the ancient blade. The air grew impossibly cold, and the sickly, sweet metallic scent was now overpowering, making it difficult to breathe. "Her simple game, David," the dry, raspy voice whispered, now seeming to come from all around him, surrounding him. "You try to find the exit. I try to find a new exhibit." David's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure, unadulterated fear. He scrambled backward, bumping into a display case, the sound echoing loudly in the oppressive silence. He could hear the faint, rhythmic clink of the dagger against stone, growing closer, moving with deliberate slowness. This wasn't a robbery. It was a hunt. He was the prey. He stumbled through the pitch-black exhibit, desperately trying to orient himself, his hands outstretched, brushing against cold glass and ancient artifacts. He could hear the intruder's soft, methodical footsteps, always just a few paces behind him, never closing the gap entirely, always maintaining the psychological torture. The museum, once a familiar sanctuary, had become a terrifying labyrinth. "Don't run so fast," the voice cooed, laced with a chilling amusement. "You'll spoil the fun." David knew he had to reach the main security office to trigger the full alarm to call the police. It was his only hope. He burst out of the Egyptian wing into the slightly less dark main hall, where a few emergency lights still flickered faintly, casting long, grotesque shadows. He sprinted towards the security office, his legs burning, his lungs screaming for air. Just as he reached the reinforced door, a tall, shadowy figure emerged from behind a towering exhibit of Greek sculptures, blocking his path. It was the man in the wide-brimmed hat, the ceremonial dagger now raised, its green glow illuminating his gaunt face. Not a face, David realized with a fresh wave of horror, but a swirling vortex of green energy where his features should have been. And behind him, arranged in a grotesque tableau, were 3 upright figures eerily still draped in white sheets. They were the other night guards, previously unaccounted for on the roster. Their faces, what David could glimpse of them, were devoid of life, their eyes wide with eternal terror. Outline 4. The collection's new exhibit. The sight of his fellow guards, draped and displayed like macabre exhibits, solidified David's terror into a cold, crushing despair. This wasn't a robber or a common killer. This was something ancient, something that collected souls. The swirling green vortex where the figure's face should have been pulsed with malevolent energy, its red eyes burning with a predatory hunger. "My finest collection," the dry, raspy voice whispered, now devoid of amusement, cold and absolute. Each piece unique, each expression of terror, priceless. The ceremonial dagger, still glowing with its sickly green light, shimmered in its grasp. David, his body trembling, his mind reeling, knew there was no escape. This was his final stand. He backed away slowly, his hand brushing against a heavy, ornate pedestal. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, he seized a heavy bronze bust of a Roman emperor, its cold metallic weight surprisingly comforting in his hand. He hurled it with all his might at the figure. The bust struck the entity with a dull, sickening thud, but it seemed to pass through its form, dissipating into green smoke for a brief, fleeting moment, before coalescing again, entirely unharmed. "A valiant effort, David," the voice resonated directly into his mind, no longer a whisper but a resonant echo that filled the vast hall. "But physical objects hold little sway over me. My hunger, however, is quite real. The entity took a slow, deliberate step forward, the ceremonial dagger still raised. The ghostly figures of his fellow guards seemed to shimmer, their shrouded forms turning slightly, as if anticipating his fate. The air around David grew impossibly cold, the sickeningly sweet metallic scent now overwhelming. He could feel his strength draining, his will to fight slowly eroding under the crushing weight of the entity's presence. He tried to scream, to call out, but his throat was constricted, no sound escaping. The green light from the dagger intensified, casting long dancing shadows that seemed to coil around him, binding him. The entity moved closer, its impossibly long, pale hand reaching out, not for his body but for his head. Its fingers, cold and insubstantial, brushed against his temple. And then he felt it, a profound, agonizing emptiness, a draining, as if his very essence, his fear, his memories, his life, were being siphoned away, absorbed by the swirling vortex of the entity's face. His vision blurred, the world twisting into grotesque shapes. The last thing David saw before the darkness consumed him entirely was the terrifying, triumphant burning of the entity's red eyes, and the final, chilling thought that he was about to become the museum's newest and most permanent exhibit. The next morning, the police found the Blackwood Museum eerily quiet. The emergency lights were all off. The main doors were still locked. Inside, everything appeared normal, except for the ceremonial dagger, meticulously returned to its shattered display case, its green glow now completely absent. And David, the night guard, was gone. No sign of him, no struggle, no trace. Only a faint, lingering scent of old iron, and something sickly sweet, and the silent, unblinking eyes of the museum's other permanent exhibits, watching with ancient, knowing silence.